Welcome to this podcast of the League of American Orchestras, one in a series of conversations exploring the innovative practices described in Fearless Journeys, Innovation in Five American Orchestras. I'm Catherine Maciariello, your host for this discussion. Published by the League in 2010, Fearless Journeys takes us inside five creative organizations: the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, the Pacific Symphony, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, and the Memphis Symphony Orchestra, showing how they reframe their problems and challenges, developed new strategies and pathways to success, built collaborative cultures, and found powerful new ways to engage their communities. Fearless Journeys was made possible by a generous grant from the MetLife Foundation with additional support from the National Endowment for the Arts. The book is available as a downloadable PDF as well as for Kindle and EPUB from the League's website at americanorchestras.org. In this podcast, I am joined by a team from the Memphis Symphony Orchestra. Ryan Fleur is the orchestra's president and chief executive officer. Marc Willis is the past CEO of Soulsville Foundation, operating the Soulsville Charter School. Jennifer Puckett is principal viola in the orchestra and a Soulsville mentor. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, let's get started. I remember a time actually during the Mellon Orchestra program when someone asked what would happen if orchestras stopped thinking of themselves as concert producing and delivery organizations and began thinking of themselves as community service organizations instead. There was fairly predictable skepticism and some outrage at that idea. But in Memphis, you seem to have found common ground between these opinions and overturned some pretty entrenched assumptions. And so today, I think in this podcast, we'd like to explore how you did it. Ryan, is this an either-or construct, or is it something different? What's different about the way the MSO approaches the intersection of art and community?
This, Kathy, has really been a fundamental shift in our thinking, in which artistic excellence continues to exist throughout our organization, and it is something that we continually strive for. However, artistic excellence is a means and not an end. And that's really the difference. I mean, we exist to create meaningful experiences through music, and an emphasis on that word "through." So once our culture accepted this notion, which took a lot of effort and time, it's really freed us to serve Memphis in ways that are both traditional and also incredibly creative and innovative.
That's great, and I actually later want to go into that a little bit more deeply, but I'd like to turn to Marc as part of an introduction to tell us about how the partnership actually happens at the Soulsville, in the Soulsville program, and how the underlying philosophy plays out. Marc, can you tell us how you were engaged in developing the concepts, plans, and implementation strategies, and how does it work?
We became engaged because we were invited to some conversations with the symphony about their desire to reach out into the community a little deeper, and we had relationships. We had relationships with the symphony and staff, and I believe they had relationships with us. So that conversation was easy to have, and what we did was build from that point with some brainstorming and the different parts of putting together a program where we laid out our needs and they laid out their needs, and we met in the middle to begin developing. And I like to think of it as a living program, but developing sort of the beginnings of what the program would look like, and then we would start knowing that it would evolve.
Did you know Ryan or people at the orchestra before you started these conversations?
Absolutely. I knew several people from the symphony and knew Ryan very well.
So you had a firm foundation for beginning a conversation about mutual interest.
We had probably the firmest foundation you can have, though I will say there was some skepticism about the concept. The idea of having the conversation was very easy.
We'll return later, I think, to that skepticism, so hold that thought. Jennifer, I'd like to add you to the conversation at the moment because as a musician, you are an intimate and integral part of the program. But Soulsville isn't the only community partnership you've been engaged in, and all your activities require musicians to take on new roles and responsibilities. How has your particular role changed in the organization, and what have you observed about your colleagues' responses to the program?
Well, of course, my favorite part about the whole experience being a mentor at Soulsville and actually, is actually working with the kids. It is an amazing feeling to see their faces light up every time I walk into the room. This partnership has actually touched many children's lives over the past few years. As far as the development process, I was very fortunate to have been part of creating this partnership from the very beginning. I was asked to participate in the New Strategies Lab in Princeton, New Jersey a few summers ago, where the Soulsville partnership began to unfold. And of course, Ryan and Marc were also there that week. What surprised me the most as a musician was how much planning and discussion that it actually took to establish the foundation for this mentor program. And as a musician, I learned a lot from that. That it actually takes a lot of discussion and work to make something like this happen. But as Marc was saying, it was easy to begin this partnership, and I think it's been very successful so far.
What are some of the new demands that it's placed on you in particular, I'm sure? How many years have you been with the orchestra?
This will be the beginning of my 6th year with this symphony.
And you've been playing in orchestras for how long?
Wow. Well, professionally since I was 18 years old.
So you have a long history and a lot of experience of playing in orchestras and working within organizations. And I'm just curious, really specifically, what did you have to change about your attitudes? What skills did you have to develop? Because this is not the job you signed up for 18 years ago.
Right. Well, like I was saying before, I didn't realize how many hours and planning it actually took. As a musician, we get very efficient with practicing and learning our music, and so we have to condense the amount of time it takes to learn that much music every week. So for me, it was kind of difficult to see that it actually took many, many more hours and a lot of patience, to develop a program like this. But it's been a wonderful experience for me.
Have you seen a lot of enthusiasm for these kinds of projects among your colleagues?
Yes, I'd say maybe not all musicians have chosen to be as involved, but the ones that are involved are very much engaged and involved, and we have the choice to be involved as much or as little as possible. Which
I think we've heard as a theme in a number of these podcasts, that choice is a major contributor to success of programs because it brings with it a lot of enthusiasm and investment and ownership. So I think that's fantastic that you feel that way. One of the things that seems obvious to outsiders in listening to you, Ryan, is that in Memphis you've abandoned a kind of typical one-sided language about community outreach and have established what's a much more reciprocal kind of process. I imagine, however, that there really was quite a good deal of exploration and typical outreach, maybe even some blind dates that didn't work out, as you were looking to make connections with potential partners. But the process doesn't really stop there. Could you talk about the guiding principles of artistically engaging community partnerships? What has to be there for it all to work for both partners?
We've adopted a value proposition at the orchestra that really guides every action in our organization now, and we really put 3 questions to the litmus test, if you will. And first is, the question is the activity or the partnership or whatever it might be, is it artistically meaningful or engaging? Meaning that whatever we do, there has to be the potential for it to really work and have deep meaning for the artist as well as the recipient. And that's where, when Jennifer talks about all that planning time, I mean, that's you have to really dig through that and make sure that will be there. Second is, what community need does this partnership meet? And that question is really a lot more difficult to address than it sounds, because as Marc talked about, there's talking about what our organizational values and our needs are as a symphony, and then our partners, what their values are. And then once we find the authenticity and our mutual understanding, then it's asking the really tough question of articulating what's the community need, that by working together we can uniquely address in an artistically, in a way that has some artistic depth. And now you have to understand, and I want to be really clear for people listening, amazing performances of Beethoven and Mahler and American music meet a very clear community need in Memphis, and that fits this model where we are partnering essentially with those people who are buying tickets. But there are also so many other needs that we can meet, and that we've been attempting with Soulsville. It's this need to have adult role models connecting regularly with children that just have not had adult role models. And there's also the need in Memphis to address talent retention, getting people to stay here in Memphis. So that's how that fueled the leadership development program. And then finally, the third point, the third question is does the revenue this partnership generate, does it cover our costs, and not just the direct costs of taking on the program, but ultimately does it help contribute to our overhead costs? Because the complex challenge that led us to going down this path is that orchestras in communities like Memphis and larger, we have very large fixed cost structure that have to do with our people and our musicians, and while we're not seeing as much demand to have, say, a 39-week season filled with performances, we believe strongly that there's a way that we add civic value, not just in performances, but in taking on these other artistically meaningful partnerships.
Marc, I'd like to ask you a follow-up question about that. Could you, when you talk about the need for adult role models at Soulsville, and that clearly seemed to be the foundation for structuring this partnership, what made the Memphis Symphony Orchestra an appealing partner for you? What do they actually do with you? Could you give people a sort of general description of the activities that are part of this project, and why is it so symbiotically refreshing and renewing for you?
I would start with that again. The sort of the concept of sitting down and having this conversation with the symphony was easy to do. In talking about creating partnership around mentoring, that was going to take and did take a lot of work. And I mentioned before I was a little skeptical because what we were trying to do at Soulsville was provide adult positive role models for our students. We had a model within our school, which is a rigorous college prep charter school, of using symphony as a way to leverage good behavior, good grades, and incent the children to reach those goals. The playing music is something that is a very low liability. I happen to love music and have been a musician in my past, and so we chose that as a way to rally the kids at the school. So, on the surface, it looks like, wow, the symphony is filled with great musicians, could mentor young musicians. That's great, no-brainer, it should work. But for us, it was a much deeper question. One is ensuring that the role models, the mentors, fit the program and the needs of our students, and that means that our kids were not striving to be musicians. Some of them may end up being musicians, but our goal at the school was to send them to college to study whatever they choose to study. We were not a music prep program. So having played a little bit before, and certainly knowing some of the musicians in the orchestra, and generally talking about great musicians, those two things don't always connect together. Some are great at mentoring kids around what it means to be a full and complete mentor. Some are challenged with that. Now, all of them can teach, but this was beyond teaching a younger musician. So we needed to be sure that part of the program could work, and that the mentors that came from the symphony understood that there may be times where they had to just have an ear, put an arm around a kid, metaphorically if nothing else, to inspire that kid to keep pushing and keep striving based on the challenges that kid may have. So that was an important ingredient, and I think what made it appealing, or how we got for it to be a wonderful idea and something that would work, is talking through all of that. Again, we sort of laid out a lot of our needs and our expectations about what it means to be engaged with our students, which is the highest value and that we have to offer. So we don't take that process lightly, and we just don't open our doors to anybody that says, "Hey, I want to come hang out with your kids." That won't do. So in sort of talking through that, and of course understanding the symphony and where their needs were, and expanding, my perception is expanding their reach to touch the community. And then you think about kids that weren't attending the symphony, at least not on any regular basis. Many had never been before. And it needed to be more than just trying to get a few kids to come hear a couple of symphonies. It needed to be much deeper and richer in that. And so we talked about that. It needed to be that for the symphony as well. They needed to have, as Ryan just talked about, a meaningful musical experience for them. So when you connect that mentoring piece with a rich music piece, then I think this is when it became magical. It became very appealing, and the program has expanded and it's grown over the years. So I would say we didn't start at that place, but because we were able to communicate our different needs and our different values, and everyone understand those, and then agree that we can accept those, each of us agreeing that we can accept those, design a program, knowing that it's going to evolve, and then I think the outcomes have been magical.
It sounds wonderful, and I can only imagine that for the orchestra, it was as much a learning experience as anything could be. We typically think of ourselves, or have thought of ourselves, as being the holders of the information and the learning and the knowledge, and I think it must be a wonderful experience to be involved in a partnership where dialogue produces learning and value for both partners. That brings me to another question for you, Ryan, about how you measure your success, and you talked a little bit about that earlier when you described the fundamental principles of your program, but I wonder if you could go into that in a little more detail. I mean, we typically measure our performance, I guess, by a set of artistic metrics that are sometimes apparent only to those of us inside the organizations. But for you to operate in such dramatically new ways, you've had to think about assessment differently. Could you talk about that, and how do you define success for yourselves?
Well, on the one hand, is each of the particular partnerships. So with Soulsville, I'm not going to pretend that the symphony knows how to develop metrics to measure whether a student is actually, more inclined to do math problems because Jennifer's going in once a week and mentoring. On the school end, they do attempt to capture those things. It's very difficult to really draw the line. But for us, very simply, the hard measurements, broadly speaking for us, are really the number of people that we touch, the experiences that happen, which has now increased exponentially since we've taken on this approach. And then second, frankly, the revenue from new sources that we're able to generate as a result. Ultimately, this is the basis for a new business model for how the symphony operates. Now, on the soft side, the soft measurement is where we've been really feeling it, and that the Memphis Symphony has become, again, part of Memphis's civic dialogue, and we're now part of for a much broader and diverse audience that we serve. Some of whom come to our concerts, some of whom reach us through these programs than we used to be. Now we used to be part of the civic dialogue back in the 60s and 70s. There was a much narrower audience, but we kind of lost that as we became so obsessed with being about making great music and selling tickets and raising money. And so there's a buzz that we feel, and now there are regularly people that we connect with that we didn't know already knew about us, even though they hadn't necessarily attended a performance yet. And the final thing on when you talk about measurement and all this is that it emphasizes that everything that we're doing here in Memphis is really still a work in progress, and every day, every week, we are still learning new things, and it's an evolution, as Marc said. We've empowered our musicians to help shape these programs, and some things work and some things don't, and we've created a culture that's kind of open to that, and that's what we continue to try to do.
Have you seen that this work and this journey that you still are taking is building new kinds of capacity in the organization, be that intellectual capacity, collaborative potential, other things that will be important to you in the future that you didn't have before?
Absolutely. I would say the intellectual capacity, this approach let us ultimately create this Opus One program, and I say we. I'm taking credit for something that I don't deserve to take credit for. That our musicians started this initiative, which is a series of basically conductorless concerts in unusual venues with a kind of a randomness about it, where actually it really is a partnership, but it's a partnership with a whole different demographic in Memphis, where this sort of under 45 sits. There's an intellectual capacity. There have been all those capacities, and we are very clearly on the road to financial viability as a result of this. There are new earned and contributive revenue sources that are still on a number of fronts in their nascent stages, that they haven't reached their potential, but we very clearly see it, and we know that if with continued investment and continued approach, what you see the Memphis Symphony being 5 years from now won't look much like what it is today even.
That's great. I was about to ask you the question about financial viability and financial impact of the program, and it sounds as if you are laying really fundamental groundwork for developing new revenue streams and a new business model for the orchestra that was speared, in fact, by your emphasis on artistic initiatives and community service. So that's really wonderful to see. I'm sure people will be interested in learning more about that from you. As we come to the end of the podcast, I'd like to ask each of you one final question. I'm sure that the listeners would be interested to hear your perspective about how they might apply these principles in their own communities. So could I ask each of you briefly, from your perspective inside this partnership, to offer counsel to our listeners who might be thinking about meaningful new connections with their communities?
Well, as a musician, and to all the musicians out there listening, I just encourage everyone to be open to the idea, to explore, different ways to engage in the community. It really opens a lot of doors for the symphony orchestra in today's world, and it's been an amazing experience. So I encourage everyone to go out there and do it.
Great. Mark?
Yeah, I would add that from the sort of the non-symphony world program where the partnership was one of the partnerships was birthed, I would say it's important for the symphony folks to when they partner. One of the things that we did at Soulsville is we looked at strategic partnerships as making sure that we could benefit the other partner as much as they were benefiting us. So I think you have to keep an open mind about that as well, to use Jennifer's sort of thought and words, and to make sure that there is really some sort of fluid foundation that can work and not force something to work if those things are not there.
Well, we've heard from other people in this program as well that what you're talking about, which is a kind of curiosity and humility, are absolutely critical to any kind of process like this. So thank you for emphasizing that. Ryan, let's turn to you, and I'll give you the final word.
Well, thank you. What I would say is this is now, it's really geared towards sort of the administration, the staffs, and maybe even the boards, is don't be afraid to let other people own and solve our institutional problems. Yeah, we've with all of our partnerships, and Soulsville in particular, we've developed them with active musician participation, and we've learned when we give musicians, who include some of the most creative people and thinkers, not just in our organizations, but in our community as a whole, the latitude and the control to do things. They can solve problems that we simply thought were intractable in our traditional structure.
Well, thank you so much for that, and thanks to Mark and Jennifer as well for your generous and insightful participation. We wish you well in your continued work. I know it's still a journey and a work in progress, and we'll follow it with enthusiasm and interest. For more information, we invite listeners to contact the Memphis Symphony Orchestra and to read Fearless Journeys. Just a reminder, the book is available as a downloadable PDF as well as for Kindle and EPUB from the League's website at americanorchestras.org. Thank you for joining.